Tonight on Talking Points, Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's coalition maintains control following snap election Sunday. He says his first task is dealing with North Korea.
Questions arise about U.S. operations and the terror threat in Africa following the ambush in Niger.
They don't want another 9/11. We don't want the next 9/11 to come from Niger.
And as a nation, we resolve that under the leadership of President Donald Trump, we will drive the cancer of terrorism from the face of the earth.
The Trump administration is set to declare the opioid crisis as a national public health emergency this week. President Trump's opioid commission met Friday.
We are, as an administration, as a White House, beginning with the President and now the First Lady, putting a very significant effort behind educating Americans as to the crisis next door.
ISIS loses its stronghold over Raqqa. We'll discuss what's next for the terror group and the region.
And 2 U.S. allies continue to fight in the Middle East. Iraqi forces descended on Kirkuk last week, challenging the Kurds' push for an independent state. We'll talk about it later in the show.
We have all that and more ahead. This is Talking Points.
Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe is set to serve a third term after his party won a clear majority in this weekend's snap elections. I'm Josh Carney.
And I'm Mike Riccardi. 2/3 of the Japanese parliament nearly belongs to Shinzo Abe and his Liberal Democratic Party. Exit polls predict the party will secure close to 300 of the 465 seats. Official results will come out once those affected by the recent typhoon have had a chance to vote, though they're not expected to change much. This means Abe is set to be Japan's longest-serving prime minister since World War II. He says first on the docket is dealing with North Korea, and he's expected to revise Japan's constitution that says it cannot have armed forces.
Something to note here is that Abe called for the election himself with the intent of securing a supermajority in parliament to move forward in amending the Constitution. It seems it has a okay from voters to push his policies forward and amend the country's pacifist defense strategy. It comes in the face of hostile neighbor North Korea, who flew projectiles over Japan last month.
And ever since North Korea has been flying projectiles over Japan, I don't think anybody can say that Japan's unwarranted in sort of escalating their military presence. But the question becomes, you know, where does it go? When does it end? How much escalation do we see? I mean, are we doing what President Trump has been doing thus far and really pushing the envelope when it comes to military escalation? Or are we still trying to seek out negotiations and a de-escalation?
Absolutely. There's fundamental security concerns. I think the biggest thing is until this is sort of quelled on the international stage, we won't really see kind of a simmering down from those within the region. And it certainly poses a threat not only to Japan, but everybody who surrounds North Korea as a threat. So that is a critical juncture not only for the region but for the global community as well.
And I'm not sure that Japan is really going to be taking a huge leap forward with military escalation. I think it's just, you know, it's a warming, it's a sign. Another thing to watch for is China. They just had their Communist Party Congress, and what to look for there is whether or not they're really going to push the envelope with North Korea, or you're going to see more on the U.S.-Japan side dealing with this issue.
Post these snap elections and post-China figuring out their new messaging strategy, the rhetoric will certainly be turned up, but it's a matter of how people respond not only to this issue, but to the threat in the future, and thus how the international community will address that moving forward.
I mean, Abe is the longest-serving prime minister since World War II. Obviously, the people there are very happy what he's doing. They're behind this movement. So, I mean, going forward, I think it's just going to be a progression of what Abe wants to do.
Absolutely.
All right, we'll have to leave it there.
Yep.
Up next, 4 U.S. soldiers are dead after an ambush in Niger. It begs the question, what's the extent of a terror threat coming from West Africa, and how is this administration approaching the region? We'll discuss it after the break. Don't miss it.
Hey, look, it's those guys.
Get some drinks.
good to drive?
I'm fine.
How many did you have?
I should be fine.
You should be.
Go and step out of the vehicle for me.
See ya, buddy. Good luck. So turns out, buzz driving and drunk driving, they're the same thing, and it costs around $10,000. So not worth it.
What are you, superheroes?
Just four brothers who hate bullies and love this city. Gear up, guys.
Visit aarp.org/caregiving for information on how to provide even better care for the person who wants to care of you.
The Pentagon and the FBI continue to investigate the ambush in Niger that led to the deaths of 4 U.S. soldiers, according to the Pentagon. Between 40 and 50 militants ambushed the 12-man U.S. force in Niger on October 4th, and today they released another report on the attack. We have Talking Points contributor Gabrielle Caracciolo here to discuss. So, Gabrielle, what are some of the new details that we're finding out in this latest briefing?
So the Pentagon confirmed that the U.S. troops did request additional support about an hour after the firefight began, and a remotely piloted aircraft was there within minutes after their request. About an hour after that, or two after the initial contact, some French jets arrived. And so the Pentagon is saying that they're still investigating why the U.S. troops did not request help sooner, but they believe that it's because they thought they could handle the situation on their own.
Now, Gabrielle, we actually have some audio from earlier today. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Joseph Dunford Jr., he was speaking at the Pentagon briefing on transparency and the investigation. Let's take a look.
With regard to being transparent, I think we do owe the families and the American people transparency in incidents like this, and we intend to deliver just that.
Now, speaking of transparency, Florida Representative Frederica Wilson is calling this Trump's Benghazi. I mean, is this an accurate assessment?
I think so far it's too soon to tell. One of the big things about Benghazi was the deception involved, and I think that's why General Dunford, as we just heard, is emphasizing transparency as something that they are trying to make sure they're doing. But by the same token, President Trump did not weigh in on the situation until 12 days after these 4 deaths, and the Defense Department's really been the one who's been releasing information and taking control on that end.
Given the fact that this is getting so much publicity in terms of our involvement in the continent of Africa, how would you describe U.S. troops' overall presence throughout the continent?
Well, U.S. troops in Africa really kind of fly under the radar. U.S. has military missions underway in about 20 African countries, mostly in the north, but it's small numbers, and their aim is containing and eradicating terrorism organizations who kind of tend to go to those areas because their governments are not as developed. But the American troops are supposed to be there to advise and assist, not for combat. So there's still questions remaining as to whether their mission changed at some point or kind of what happened.
Now, when we take a look at the ambush and the investigation, how can we expect America's future missions in Africa to be changed by any of this?
I think there's definitely going to be a lot more caution in the future. I think it also will depend a little bit on the Pentagon and the FBI's investigation into what happened. And once we have some of those answers of why this exactly happened the way it did, that should influence what comes next.
Gabrielle, thank you for your insight. We'll certainly be keeping a point on following those answers.
Thanks for having me.
President Trump is expected to declare the opioid crisis a national emergency later this week. Trump announced the plan last week when speaking with reporters outside the White House. In 2015 alone, over 50,000 Americans died from a drug overdose. So, is the Trump administration committed to taking the next step, or is the president just telling reporters what he thinks they want to hear? Talking Points contributor Galat Malamed has the answers. She joins us now. Galat, thanks so much for being here. So this isn't the first time that President Trump said that he's going to declare the opioid crisis a national emergency. It didn't happen the first time. What are we expecting now?
You know, I think if it does happen this time and he does declare it a national emergency, it's definitely not going to happen this week. And last week he said you'll expect to see it next week. That's realistically not going to happen. This wasn't a statement he made independently on Twitter or was at the press briefing. He only said it in response to a reporter's question who said, are you ever going to do a written national emergency declaration? The administration was kind of blindsided. They can't prepare for this in such a short period of time, especially when you don't have a head secretary for the HHS who would really be needing to front this effort.
And given the blind side, do you think that he will actually follow through with this promise? Maybe not this week, but in due time?
You know, I think so, just because Chris Christie, when they came out with the interim report over the summer, which is when he said we should declare this a national emergency, he said that is the most urgent and important thing to do. And he put together this National Opioid Commission to basically advise him on how to handle this, and they're really adamant about declaring it a national emergency.
Now, the opioid crisis was a major platform of President Trump's during the campaign. Much like other issues, it hasn't fully come to fruition just yet. I mean, how are Americans feeling about this? Are they satisfied with the response?
The simple answer is they're not. According to the polls, one of the most recent polls, it was conducted about a month ago, PBS NewsHour Marist poll, 6 out of 10 Americans are unhappy with the job President Trump is doing with the opioid crisis. It is important to look at the party lines. It was 85% of Democrats unhappy, 36% of Republicans unhappy. But nonetheless, the majority of Americans are unhappy with this. And then when you look at the states that are really suffering the most from this, the top 5 states, you have Ohio in the top 5, West Virginia in the top 5, and Kentucky in the top 5. So those Rust Belt states are the ones affected by this the most. And they were a big part of why Trump was elected into office.
So what does declaring an actual state of emergency give the government and give the National Guard or whomever the power to do that they don't already have?
Right, so the most important thing is not even the amount of funding, it's where you can then draw funds from because it's declared a national emergency. So you could draw funds from places they're not able to now, like public health funds, and also not in terms of stuff outside of the government, just as society as a whole. It'll help raise more awareness and kind of combat this stigma because usually you don't have these national emergencies unless for natural disasters, Zika, influenza, you know, those things that are contagious of that sort. So that'll kind of show how important this is that we unprecedentedly did declare this a national emergency.
Well, Galat, we'll definitely be paying attention to the National Opioid Commission's final report, which is due November 1st. Thanks so much for being here.
The island of Puerto Rico continues to struggle nearly a month after Hurricane Irma hit. Tomorrow, the Senate is expected to cast a final vote on a $36 billion disaster relief bill that would help aid the island. Talking Points contributor Sabrina Maggiore is in studio to update us on the situation.
Thanks, Josh. The devastation wrought by Hurricane Maria has completely upended the lives of 3.4 million Puerto Rican residents. Nearly a month after the storm, Puerto Rico remains largely without power, and over 40% of residents still don't have cell phone signals. And about a third of islanders don't have running water. Thousands of homes were destroyed by the storm, and hospitals relying on generators can only provide limited access to life-saving equipment. Complicating relief efforts is the fact that the financial situation in Puerto Rico was dire even before the storm hit. The territory filed for bankruptcy back in May and has a $74 billion debt load. The damages caused by the storm will exacerbate the territory's already steep economic crisis. First priority for the island is restoring the power grid, but that could cost up to $5 billion, which the country doesn't have. Experts say realistically, Puerto Rico is looking at 4 to 6 months before power is restored. If the Senate pushes ahead with the disaster relief bill, that would send over $4.9 billion to Puerto Rico. The bill would next go to President Donald Trump for signature. Mike and Josh?
Thanks, Sabrina. When we get back, ISIS loses their so-called capital, but will that bring more stability to the region? We'll have Talking Points contributor Dan Prager in studio to talk about it.
Here's your check. Oh, you got it. You know, since I got rid of my car, I really enjoy walking.
Okay. Got it. Nope.
Getting pulled over for buzz driving could cost you around $10,000 in fines, legal fees, and increased insurance rates.
Oh, you're home early.
You live with your mom?
That'll set your game back a few years. Buzzed, busted, and broke. Because buzz driving is drunk driving.
Come on, it's not that hard.
My big man fingers are having a problem with these little tiny buttons.
Whoa, watch it there. Your blood pressure's gonna go through the roof.
Tell me about it. I'm trying to learn how to get it down. Instead, it keeps going up.
High blood pressure can increase the risk for heart attack or stroke. Learn how to keep yours at a healthy range.
Ever hear a voice command? Just say text barbershop to 97779.
That's not what I said.
Just give me that. Now my blood pressure's up.
Every time I hear the alarm bell go off in school, I think it's an air raid.
A lot of houses in our neighborhood have been destroyed.
I like to close my ears and sing songs whenever the bombs come close. I'm worried our new neighbors won't like us.
But I know it's all gonna be worth it.
I just want my family to be safe.
But these are not my words.
These are not my words. These are not my words.
It's official. Raqqa is no longer the capital of ISIS. Last week, the U.S. announced they had taken back the city from the Islamic State. The Trump administration says this means the end of ISIS as a caliphate is in sight. But Talking Points contributor Dan Prager says the problems are just beginning for Syria and the U.S. Dan, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so ISIS, they lost their biggest city, but you're saying that we shouldn't be celebrating. Why?
All right, so this is definitely a good thing and something that needed to happen. The U.S. and the coalition forces have been trying to get in here for a long time. But it's not the end of ISIS, and it's not the end of instability in the region. You're going to see a lot of battles from control of Raqqa, from the government and rebels, to just the future of terrorism as it's shaped from ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and other forces like that. This is not the end. In fact, you're kind of exploding ISIS into a bunch of different pieces, but those different pieces are still active.
So the government and the rebels have been fighting for years at this point. So do we expect that there will be another fight for Raqqa in the future?
Oh, absolutely. Coming up very soon, you're going to see another fight between the rebels and the government, and it's a fight the government is most likely going to win. The U.S. has made it clear, President Trump has made it clear that he does not want any part of nation building in the region, and Russia has kind of taken their pro-Assad forces and have used it to kind of take back Raqqa. Russia is going to be a key player in asserting Assad's dominance over that area.
Now, President Trump has said that ISIS is basically defeated. His advisors are not so sure. I mean, are we going to see ISIS sort of resort back to one of those traditional terrorist groups?
Most likely. Actually, some good news I just saw yesterday. The New York Times had reported that a lot of those former ISIS fighters, there's estimated about 6,500 ISIS fighters around the region, have not necessarily gone back to countries to perform those lone wolf acts of terror. It doesn't mean it's not going to happen, it just means it hasn't happened yet. What people are expecting is just that they're going to spread across the world, they're going to dissolve out of that caliphate that they used to have, and they're going to go commit these acts of terror. And the people they lose in ISIS now that it's defeated are going to go to Al-Qaeda, who's been in the region, the Taliban. There's all of these terrorist groups that are waiting to pick up the areas that ISIS kind of just lost. So it's not really, it's a win, but we'll expect to see a lot of dangerous things in the future.
Well, the story certainly is not ending here. Dan, glad to have you here. Excuse me.
The prospect of a Kurdish state appears in jeopardy after the Iraqi army descended on the city of Kirkuk last week. Talking Points contributor Elijah Shama is here to tell us what the offensive means for the world's largest stateless ethnic group. Elijah, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So now with Kurdistan kind of in a balance between control by the Iraqis, what does this mean for the Kurds as people moving forward?
As a people moving forward, this really complicates things. It's really hard to kind of overestimate how much Kirkuk means to the Kurds. It has 25% of the oil revenue and 4% of the world's oil. This was a major city for them, and this was kind of, they were testing to see how far they could make the Kurdish state. This was the outer limit of
And in that, though, why would they start with Kirkuk? What is the significance of that?
The significance of that is that Kirkuk has been generally called an Arab city, not a Kurdish city. So Iraq, kind of starting with Kirkuk, basically says, okay, we might let you have a state, but this is an Arab city. This isn't a Kurdish city. This is very clearly not yours, and we're taking it back. And that's a big deal economically for the Kurds and even territorially.
Now, Iran was a major player in this recapture. What has their role been so far, and what's their role going to be moving forward?
Iran has been kind of instrumental in, when we talk about these Shia militias that are being seen on the front lines fighting with the Iraqi army, those are being led by Qasem Soleimani, who is an Iranian general who has been kind of instrumental in helping Baghdad get back on its feet and fight ISIS. And what we've really seen is that these Shia militias kind of made the difference. The Kurds didn't want to fight them, and they dropped and ran.
So the Kurdish Peshmerga helped ISIS. So how were they rooted from the city so quickly?
It's interesting because there are reports basically saying that Kirkuk was lost in part because of tribal infighting. The Kurds have two main factions, the KRG and the PUK. The PUK is run by the former Prime Minister of Iraq, now deceased, Talabani. Talabani, his clan basically made a deal with these Shia militias saying that they wouldn't fight, assuming that the Shia militias wouldn't push any further into Kurdistan. So Talabani's clan controls the Peshmerga. The Peshmerga said they weren't going to fight. That basically made it a very short fight.
Now, as we know, the United States has been neutral so far in the fight. What's the reaction to that been?
Kurds especially feel very betrayed by the U.S. When we look at this, they felt like they were doing the majority of the heavy lifting fighting ISIS. They felt instrumental, and they feel like they've kind of been abandoned, and now they're having U.S. armor that's been gifted to the Iraqi army being used against them. And it's really left them very bitter, very angry, and a lot of them are turning to Russia for help now, seeing that maybe the U.S. can't be that ally, but Russia can be.
Elijah, thank you for your insight. Certainly something we'll be keeping our eye on.
After the break, we'll have some stories you may have missed in the news cycle this week. Don't go away.
Well, Thomas, you've got pre-diabetes. But with more exercise and a change in diet, it can be reversed.
I've tried exercising. It just makes me hungry for bacon.
I love bacon, too. And who really likes to exercise?
Not me.
Me neither.
Nobody. So we're good?
What? Oh, you still have pre-diabetes. Big time.
Your daughter just had her first breakup. Do you A, put yourself in her shoes? B, console her?
Don't worry, sweetie. This is gonna happen a lot.
Or C, find her a new boyfriend?
Nice, single boys. That was weird.
As a parent, there are no perfect answers. But you don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care will love you just the same.
Here we go. We're gonna go out there in the rain. You're gonna get wet. All right, here we go. Okay, quick. Oh, yeah, yes. So much fun. Mwah. So wet.
Some stories don't capture the mainstream attention they deserve. This week on Talking Points, we covered the set release of classified JFK files and Governor Cuomo's decision to sign legislation to give additional health care benefits to volunteer firefighters. The only thing standing between the public and the documents regarding JFK's assassination is President Trump. But on Saturday, the president tweeted that he intended to allow for the release of the nearly 3,000 files subject to the receipt of further information.
Intelligence agencies are reportedly urging the president not to release the documents. They say some of the information in the classified files could be harmful to U.S. security interests. The White House said in a statement that the president will release the documents in the interest of full transparency, though they also say that the release will be blocked if agencies can show the documents will create clear threats to national security. The documents are expected to be released on Thursday.
On Sunday, Governor Cuomo signed new legislation that will afford health care benefits to volunteer firefighters suffering from certain types of cancer. These include lung, breast, and prostate cancer, among others. To qualify, firefighters must have had no evidence of the specified cancers, 5 years of service fighting fires inside buildings, and are either currently volunteering or within 5 years of their last service date.
The governor tweeted on Sunday that New York is forever grateful to the 96,000 volunteer firefighters who selflessly work to keep their neighbors and communities safe. Firefighters in New York are currently eligible to accidental disability and death benefits via workers' compensation. The new law is set to go into effect on January 1st in 2019. We'll take a quick break and come back with the stories you should be paying attention to in the weeks ahead. Stay with us.
This is the story of a boy who didn't talk for a long time. The boy liked things to always be the same. Any changes would scare and upset him. The unknown was an unfriendly place. The boy was very sensitive to lights and sounds. So he built secret hiding places where they couldn't get in. The boy didn't like looking people in the eye. He wasn't trying to be mean, it just made him feel uncomfortable. Sometimes he would flap his arms again and again.
One day, I found out I have something called autism. My family got me help. Slowly, I found my voice and learned all the ways I could live with it better.
Early intervention can make a lifetime of difference. Learn the signs at autismspeaks.org.
Open enrollment for Obamacare starts next week on November 1st and runs 45 days into mid-December. With the uncertainty surrounding health care in the last few weeks, insurance companies are readying for a loss of enrollees due to potentially higher rates for some consumers. After President Trump's executive order last week, insurance companies are afraid of losing healthy enrollees, which could drive up prices. On the other hand, the potential bipartisan deal between Senators Murray and Alexander could restore some stability to the markets. The enrollment period this year is shorter than in years past, and the Trump administration is providing less funding for advertising. With only days to go and a short window for enrollment, the healthcare status for millions of Americans is still up in the air.
President Trump is expected to announce his pick for the next chairperson of the Federal Reserve this week. Trump and his administration are closing in on several candidates that would fundamentally shake up Chairwoman Yellen's current fiscal initiatives. The administration has confirmed a short list of candidates, but the two frontrunners seem to be Fed Governor Jerome Powell and Stanford professor John Taylor. Powell is a former Goldman Sachs executive. Taylor is an academic champion in conservative circles. This decision by Trump will have significant implications for the course of the nation's economy and wield a tremendous amount of influence as the debate over tax reform continues to brew. This week, I'll be looking ahead to how Trump's decision will impact the administration's agenda in the foreseeable future. Well, that's all the time we have tonight on Talking Points. Thanks for joining us.
Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for clips, as well as CitrusTV.com for full-length episodes.
Well, for all of us here at Talking Points, we sure do hope that you check all those resources out, and we're always available 24/7 around the clock in a digital platform.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
I'm Mike Riccardi.
And I'm Josh Carney.
Have a good night.